Okay, it looks like, well, a couple of people are still connecting. Just one moment here. All right, it looks like everybody's back, and Mr. Petrozelli, your hand is up. Please proceed.
Yes, Mr. Lilly, I checked with Ms. Stork on her progress over lunch. She said she was still working on her CV. I did ask her if she was not finished when we came back and cross-examination resumed, if she would take a break and then until we finished. So.
Okay, so Ms. Stork, do you have an estimated time for when you can complete your statement of qualifications?
Yeah, can we say by 7 p.m. tonight?
Okay, why don't you go ahead and work with Mr. Petrozelli and then upload it to the prosecution team's exhibit folder, and then we'll move it over when we get that. We'll probably won't do it tonight, but we'll do it tomorrow morning if you upload it tonight. Or you can upload in the morning and we'll follow up. We'll see whether or not we're going to be back in hearing tomorrow or not. All right, well, thank you for following up on that. And with that, my notes are that we are now ready for cross-examination questions of Mr. Vasquez, Mr. Eggers, and Ms. Stork. And I said we would start with Ms. Nichols. So Ms. Nichols, you may proceed, and it'd probably be good if you introduce yourself to the witnesses before you start your questioning.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lilly. Good afternoon. My name is Meredith Nickel. I'm an attorney for the San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water District. And my questions today are designed for the panel. Unlike the cross-examination we've seen so far, I'm looking for whoever on the panel has the most information regarding my questions. So with that, if I could have the revised report of investigation PT3 pulled up on the screen.
Okay, we will get PT3.
And we'll go to page 8.
All right, and let us know where you want us to scroll to.
Let's scroll down to section 2.1. I'm going to ask some questions about that first full paragraph under section 2.1.
All right, please proceed.
Okay, thank you. The last sentence there reads, most of the precipitation in the San Bernardino region falls on the San Bernardino and San Gabriel Mountains, and streams issuing from the mountains supply most of the groundwater recharge to basins in the San Bernardino area, parentheses, Dutcher and Garrett, 1963, parentheses. So my question is whether the diversions by BlueTriton that are the subject of the draft CDO come from the streams that supply most of the groundwater recharge to the basins in the San Bernardino area that are mentioned in this sentence. And I suppose I'll start with Mr. Vasquez, simply since I think you're probably the lead in terms of this document. And so if you're not able to answer, maybe you can direct on the panel who would be best to answer the question.
Yes, on this one, I would defer to Ms. Stork.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Stork?
Yes, I would actually, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Do the diversions that are the subject of the draft cease and desist order come from the streams that supply most of the groundwater recharge to basins in the San Bernardino area that are mentioned in this sentence?
Yes, based on the citation here and what I know about the stream we're discussing today, I would say yes.
So if the water was not diverted, that is the water, let me strike that. If the water that is the subject of the draft CDO were not diverted, would that water instead contribute to these streams that are mentioned in this sentence?
Yes.
Is the water diverted by BlueTriton that is the subject of this proceeding tributary to the Santa Ana River?
I believe so. This is the Santa Ana River watershed. So based on that, yes.
It is the water that BlueTriton is diverting that is the subject of this proceeding tributary to groundwater basins in the San Bernardino area.
Yes. I do want to make a quick qualification in that the length of Strawberry Creek and East Twin Creek, there are gaining and losing reaches along the creek. And so molecule per molecule, it may not make it all the way down, but it is tributary to the creek, which flows to the groundwater basin.
Okay, great. Thanks. I think that was a helpful clarification.
And excuse me, Ms. Nickel, but Ms. Stork, I know this is second nature to you, but just so our record is clear, can you give a brief description or definition of what you mean by gaining and losing reaches?
Yes. So on streams and rivers, they tend to have reaches that are either gaining or losing in that they're either receiving flow from groundwater along the length of the stream. So they'll be increasing in flow rate because of contributions from groundwater around the stream, or they may be losing in flow where water is moving out of the stream bed to recharge groundwater.
Okay, thank you. When you said losing inflow, I just want to make sure that inflow is two different words there, right? Losing inflow, is that correct?
Yes, losing in flow. So flow is decreasing in the stream because it is recharging groundwater. And this is something that happens with all streams and rivers. They have gaining and losing reaches based on the hydrogeology of the area in which they're flowing through, coupled with where the water table is, and the time of year and what the situation is at the time.
All right, thank you. Ms. Nickel, you may proceed.
Thank you. I actually don't have any further questions on this document, and I have just one more document to ask about. It's Exhibit PT4, which is the State Water Board Division of Water Rights Office of Enforcement response to public comments on the report of investigation dated December 20th, 2017.
All right, we will put up PT4 on the screen.
Thank you. And I'm looking for page 23.
And we'll scroll to that page when we get it posted. All right. We have PT4, page 23 on the screen.
Okay, thank you. And I think we're going to go down a few more paragraphs.
And just so the record is clear, this is section 5.2, which is discussing comments from San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water District. And tell us what you want us to scroll to.
Okay, thank you. I think it's the response to the last comment.
Is this the one that's up now? We don't know if it's the last one or not.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not placing it in my view. Keep going. Sorry.
Okay, well, that's the last comment. So
Oh,
that's
then it
it.
must be the first one. Go up.
Okay, we have comment 1 and comment 2. So the question, ask about comment 1. Go ahead.
Yep, it's comment 1. Thank you. Actually, it's the response. Sorry, I missed that. In response to comment number 1, the first sentence states that division staff agree that any unauthorized diversion of surface water by Nestle above 1963 levels would injure the parties to the Western Municipal Water District versus East San Bernardino County Water District judgment and the Orange County Water District versus City of Chino judgment. So I'll again direct my question to Mr. Vasquez, and if there's someone else on the panel who's more qualified to answer, I'd welcome the reference. My question is, what does the word injure in this sentence mean?
It would mean injury to a senior water right, or I believe this judgment includes groundwater. So the way I read this response, it would also be including parties that extract groundwater. So it would be injuries to senior water right holders and also
Objection. I believe this is outside the scope, Mr. Lilly.
The scope of what?
My understanding is this issue had been rejected. May I respond, Mr. Lilly?
Yeah, please do, Ms. Nickel.
I'm simply asking for the meaning of a response to a comment. I'm not asking about the issue that has been excluded, which is whether any diversions would violate or whether there's been any violation of these two judgments. I'm simply asking about the meaning of a sentence that was in a word that was used in response to these comments.
Yeah, I'm going to overrule the objection. I think that when I narrowed the issue as a result of our pre-hearing process, it was really for specific violations of the judgment that we were excluding issues. And I think it is appropriate for Ms. Nickel to ask a general question about effects of diversions by BlueTriton on other parties or other water users in the Santa Ana River watershed. So I'll overrule the objection. If you need to, it might be good, Ms. Nickel, if you restate the question. I think Mr. Eggers was partway through, or Mr. Vasquez was partway through an answer, but it might be good if you just asked the same question or a follow-up question.
Thank you. I was actually going to ask a follow-up question, and it was whether the word injure here is used as it is intended to be used under California water law or some other definition of the word injure.
And when I I wrote this document, and it was intended to mean that water taken without authorization, without a valid water right, would deny that same water to other parties with a valid water right.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Eggers. I have no further questions.
All right, I'm just writing this down. Just give me a minute. All right, thank you, Ms. Nickel. On my order of questioners, I have Ms. Fry next. So Ms. Fry, you may question these witnesses.
Hi. Okay, so I'm going to ask just a few questions. Mr. Vasquez, yesterday you talked about the orifice. Is the opening at the end of a pipe considered an orifice?
what I was speaking to was the natural spring orifice.
Okay.
So
And
I do not consider the end of the pipe or the borehole as a spring, as the natural spring orifice,
okay,
which is what I was.
so that clears that up. And you were also asked about laws and statutes that pertain to hydrogeological terms. But we're not discussing. I just want to clarify.
Ms. Fry, please try to make questions here, not statements.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay.
I'm sorry to fluster you, but I really don't want.
I understand what you're saying.
Questions.
I understand. Okay. So hydrogeological terms are not for food bottling and food labeling are not concerns of the investigating team. Is that true?
I believe if you were asking when I responded to a question about whether the definition of spring water under FDA regulations is overlaps or is the same as what we in the Division of Water Rights apply to determine water that's within our permitting authority.
Uh-huh.
So what's your answer to wait, excuse me, Mr. Vasquez. So what's your answer to her question? Are the hydrologic terms used for food bottling regulations of concern to or relevant to the prosecution team?
My there are terms that would be in common in both areas, in FDA regulations and in water rights. I believe there are common terms that are technical in nature.
Okay.
I would
that's
venture
really,
some have a very specific definition that's reserved for FDA regulations, however.
sure. Okay. And then the other, I had one other question. So if an orifice on a natural spring is opened up, I mean, you just made it a little bigger, and that water still comes to the surface, is it still a spring?
Yes.
I mean, just,
The
okay, yes, okay. I'll
Yeah.
take that. And then there was a kind of a question that I happened to buy a Black's Law dictionary, so I wanted to read something. This says, water brought to the surface and made available for use by the party claiming the water rights is considered developed water. So in light of just opening up an orifice, and could that just, of a natural spring, could that be considered developed water?
Objection. We're asking for legal analysis.
Okay.
I overruled the objection. Mr. Vasquez can testify to the extent he has knowledge of that. It certainly is relevant to the legal matters he has included in his written testimony.
I believe in my testimony, in the written testimony, in the ROI, and in my oral presentation, I discussed that developed water is the amount that is above the amount or the flow amount that's above the natural flow of the natural spring.
But it's still a spring.
Wait. So
Is that still a spring?
okay.
Would you still consider that a spring?
The prosecution staff's understanding of order 2019-149, as I stated, is that water is still within our permitting authority, or that the discharge from the spring is still within our permitting authority.
So it's still a spring. Okay, Mr. Eggers, I want to ask.
Wait. Stop, Ms. Fry. If you're going to make a statement like that, you have to ask a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think he already said that it would still be a spring if the orifice is increased. So please just ask questions.
I shouldn't have. So I'm sorry. Excuse me. Okay, I want to go
to wait. Stop.
I just want to ask.
Wait. Everybody stop.
I just want to ask.
Stop.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I just want to remind everyone, we have a court reporter, and the court reporter can only take down one person talking at a time. So please, if somebody is talking, wait until that person is finished talking before you start talking. Otherwise, we will get a garbled transcript and the court reporter will not appreciate that. So please let me have a little control over who speaks when here, and we'll try to get through this. All right, so with that, Mr. Vasquez, do you have a follow-up answer to Ms. Fry's last question that you would like to give?
First, I would just like to ask, I have gardeners outside my window right now. I just want to ask if it's interfering with you hearing me.
No, you're fine.
Okay, thank you.
So is that all?
I just wanted to go to BTB 2048, this picture of this train that was shown.
Okay, all right, wait. So slow down, Ms. Fry.
Sorry.
Do you want us to post one of the BTB exhibits on the screen?
If you could real quick.
Which exhibit?
048. It's a picture of the train.
Wait, the BTB exhibits.
Oh, well, let's just forget it. Never mind. I'll just ask this. Oh, well, the exhibit says General Manager Smith. Wait. No. Don't do that. Okay.
You can't read and testify. Yeah, you will have your
Oh, I
chance to
see.
testify. If you
Okay,
want
well,
us to put,
okay.
wait,
Let's
no,
just
wait,
go on. I'm just
stop.
going to withdraw.
Stop. When I am talking, do not talk, please. Because the court reporter cannot take it down if we're both talking at the same time. So please wait. Now, would you like to ask a question about a BlueTriton exhibit, or do you want to move on?
I would like to ask a question about the BlueTriton exhibit.
Okay,
B2048.
Okay, I'm confused by the numbering. Does anybody know
Mr.
what?
Lilly, to be helpful, I think she's referring to BTB Exhibit 2, page 048. Is that correct, Ms. Fry?
That's correct. It's exhibit 5 under, I
I'm
guess that's the Bates number down there.
Okay.
So
So time out. Let's put up BTB2.
yeah, BTB2 only goes to page 9, so we cannot be talking about the same document. Let's try again.
Okay.
I don't know. There, that's it.
Okay. So let's see what we have on the screen. We have
Okay, now scroll down
Oh, I'm
and
sorry.
right under the heading, there we go. It says progress on the Redlands Riverside Extension train.
There.
Now, was there water bottling plant in Redlands or Riverside?
Not that I know of.
Okay. That's all. I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, and just so the record, that was BTB5. I'm sorry, Ms. Mullen, can you put that back up just so our record can be clear on what page that was? That's BTB5, page 48 that was displayed. All right, so Ms. Fry, you may proceed with your questions and let us know if you want us to post any other exhibits. We're glad to do so. We just need to know the exhibit number and the page.
I think I'm done with questioning. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry if I interrupted, but we do have a process we have to follow here.
That's fine. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So, Mr. Lowe, you may proceed with your questions. And please go off mute so we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please proceed.
Okay, so I'd like to speak to the three of them, and the one that knows the answer the best, answer please. Also, my first questions are going to be to all three of them. So rather than taking the time to go ask the question over again, if we could have each one answer each question with just a yes or no is all I really care about. So it could go really quickly.
Okay, well, if that's the case, Mr. Lowe, it's probably easiest just to ask each witness and order the question. So why don't you just direct your question to a specific question to a specific witness and then proceed that way.
Okay.
Otherwise, they won't know which one should be answering first.
Okay. Okay, so let's start with these questions in with Victor and go to Thomas and then go to Natalie. Is that okay?
Except, okay. Mr. Lowe, I have asked that we refer to people by their last name. So start with your questions for Mr. Vasquez, please.
Okay. Mr. Vasquez, how long have you worked for the state government?
Specifically for the State Water Board and the Regional Water Quality Control Boards, roughly about 21 years now.
Thank you. Ms. Stork, how long have you worked for the state?
I've worked for the State Water Board for 7 years now.
And for the state of California, 7 years total?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Eggers, how long have you worked for the state of California?
Since 2013.
2013. Okay, thanks. All right. Okay, Mr. Vasquez, do you consider yourself to be a dedicated employee?
I do, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Eggers, do you consider yourself to be a dedicated employee?
Yes.
And Ms. Stork, do you consider yourself to be a dedicated employee?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Vasquez, do you do the best you can to serve the public of California?
Yes, I do. Every day.
Thank you. Mr. Eggers, do you consider yourself to do the best you can to serve the public?
Yes.
Ms. Stork, do you consider that you do the best you can to serve the public?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Vasquez, would you falsify or leave out any relevant information in any investigation you were doing just to keep somebody from getting a water right?
Definitely not.
Mr. Eggers, would you falsify or leave out any relevant information in an investigation that you were involved in just to keep someone from getting a water right?
No.
Thank you. Ms. Stork, would you falsify or leave out any relevant information from an investigation you were doing just to keep someone from getting a water right?
No.
Okay, thank you. Would you do this to BlueTriton or their predecessors for any reason different than you would treat anyone else?
Wait, again, Mr. Lowe, I think you have to be clear who you're asking the
Okay, I'm
question
sorry.
to. So state the
Mr.
name of the person.
Okay, Mr. Vasquez, would you treat BlueTriton any different than you would any other water right applicant or claimant?
No.
Mr. Eggers, would you treat BlueTriton any different than you would any other applicant or water rights holder?
No.
Ms. Stork, would you treat BlueTriton any different than you would any other water rights holder or applicant?
No.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Vasquez, do you do your very best to follow state and federal laws, policies, and guidelines?
I do.
Mr. Eggers, do you do your very best to follow federal and state laws, policies, and guidelines?
Yes.
Ms. Stork, do you do your very best to follow all state and federal laws, policies, and guidelines?
Yes.
Okay. Do you guys, I'm sorry, Mr. Vasquez, do you run most of your work past your legal office to make sure that what you're doing is legally correct in the state of California?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Eggers, do you run most of the things that you do by your legal advice to make sure that you're doing what's right and legal in the state of California?
I don't know if I would use the word most. We do a
Okay.
lot.
Any critical things, do you run them by your legal people to make sure you're doing the right thing?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Stork, do you run by anything that's legally questionable by your legal staff to make sure that you're legally correct in the state of California?
Yes.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Vasquez. Are you guys kind of held responsible for using the best science in the decisions that you make and recommend?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Eggers, are you pretty much bound in your job to follow the best science and be responsible for using the best science in the decisions and recommendations you make?
We do endeavor to follow the law and the science.
And the science, thank you. Ms. Stork, do you feel obligated in your agency to do the best you can to follow the best science in your recommendations?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Vasquez, are you qualified in the state of California to do the job that you do for the Department of Water Rights or the Division of Water Rights?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Mr. Eggers, are you qualified to do the job that you're doing for the Department Division of Water Rights?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Stork, are you qualified in the state of California to do the job that you're being held responsible for in the Division of Water Rights?
Yes,
you were in-
clarifying that I now work for the Office of Research, Planning and Performance, but yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, those are the questions in that vein that I wanted to get through. Now we'll talk about some other things, and let's see. Since we're doing it where I need to ask somebody, I'll ask Victor, probably, unless I see somebody else I should talk to. Okay. Victor.
Excuse me, Mr. Lowe, just a reminder.
Sorry, Mr. Vasquez, I'm sorry.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Vasquez. BlueTriton was upset and challenging your acceptance of comments from the public after
Objection.
after the 18th of.
Okay, Mr. Lowe, wait, Mr. Lowe, please stop.
Okay.
The objection is sustained. Please ask a question. Don't have a statement.
Okay. Are you guys bound in investigations that you're doing and in day-to-day understanding of water rights to only take applications during a certain period of time? Victor, Mr. Vasquez.
So I would answer that as it is a general practice for complex complaints when we issue a report of investigation to set a deadline to receive comments and we specify that it should be compelling to make us reconsider our conclusions. And if we receive compelling information by the deadline, or as I said yesterday, a couple of days, maybe even up to a week after that deadline, if it's compelling, I feel it is our duty to listen to the public if we are getting comments. And so we will consider those, whether or not we are going to further the investigation. Afterwards, when we have decided we're going to continue the investigation, I am not aware of any restrictions on us on how much more information we can receive, from whom, or by when.
Okay, thank you. Okay, based on your case that you presented, it appears that you had enough technical reports and historical reports.
Wait, again, Mr. Lowe, you're not asking a question, you're making a statement. Please ask a question.
Well, I was going to say, is it correct that based on historical flows and information?
Objection. This is leading.
Miss Grady, let's let him finish his question, and then Mr. Vasquez, pause for a minute, and I'll give Miss Grady another chance to object. But go ahead, Mr. Lowe, ask the question.
I'm trying to make sure I word it right. Hang on.
Okay.
Mr. Lilly, I mean, Mr. Lowe is not an attorney. I think he's trying to, lay a foundation and, orient the witnesses, and he's doing
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm aware that he is not an attorney and that he's doing the best he can. This is a complex process with rules of law, but the Water Board does encourage interested parties to participate. And I think Mr. Lowe is doing the best he can, but on the other hand, Ms. Grady has the right to object. So we will proceed. So Mr. Lowe, go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, Ms. Stork, are you there still?
Uh-oh. Well, no,
Yes,
Ms.
sorry, my space heater was blasting. I just had to shut it down for a second. I apologize. I'm
Thank
here.
you. Oh, thank you. Based on the historical records that you know of, should the headwaters of Strawberry Creek, where the springs are located, be wetter than it is today when you go visit the site?
I would defer to Ms. Stork on answering that question.
Ms.
That's
Stork,
granted.
Ms. Stork, you may answer if you can.
I would say that if there were no diversions of spring flow from the location, there would be more flow in that area with the springs flowing in channels towards Strawberry Creek.
Thank you. We're, let's see. Natalie, you're probably the best for this.
Ms. Stork, please.
I'm sorry, Ms. Stork. Okay, were all the springs that you visited on your field trip to the site, were all the springs developed except for the Forest Service spring, Headwater Spring, and spring number 4?
All of the springs that we visited were developed with the exception of springs 10, 11, and 12 because we were in the general area, but we didn't know exactly where they were.
Okay, thank you. Were any of them natural enough that you could still find the natural orifice?
No,
Thank you. Was there an abundance of riparian vegetation at the sites?
Objection, scope.
I think I'm going to allow the question. I think it is relevant to indications of the amounts of water that might be flowing from the diversions or the spring site. So Ms. Stork, you may answer it if you can.
I'm not an expert in the types of vegetation that would be classed as riparian vegetation. One of the Forest Service staff people on site made some comments to me about the types of vegetation there and what they could indicate. And I believe there's some notes on that in my inspection narrative.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
I'm wondering if Victor or Tomas might have more appropriate information.
All right, so Mr.
Oh, sorry,
Vasquez.
Mr. Vasquez or Mr. Eggers, I apologize.
All right, Mr. Vasquez or Mr. Eggers, does either of you want to add a response to Mr. Lowe's question?
Did you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was basic. Well, I better let Mr. Lowe repeat it. Mr. Lowe, ask your question directly to Mr. Eggers.
Okay, normally springs have a lot of riparian vegetation around them, such as willows, alders.
Wait, Mr. Lowe,
Okay.
no, ask a question though, please.
Okay. Did the spring sites currently, the way they're being operated, have an abundance of riparian vegetation at the sites?
I don't have any additional information to add.
And Mr. Vasquez, do you have any additional information you would like to add in response to that question?
I was at the site visit, so I did see the sites. And I don't recall a lot of vegetation around the vaults. I would say around the meadow. In the meadow, there are towards the Strawberry Creek channel, there was more vegetation there. And I do recall the comment from the Forest Service staff who mentioned the types of plants that would indicate presence of water in the area.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Stork, is it your understanding that the springs were developed over a long period of time, starting in approximately 1929-30 and extending up into the 70s, 80s?
Depends on the spring. According to table 3 in my report. Let's see. No, I apologize. That doesn't list the original dates.
That's okay. That's okay.
My understanding for springs, for some of the springs, is that development started back in the 1930s or possibly around there.
Okay, thanks. And is it your understanding that they originally started out as spring developments and then they've been increased in size and increased in depth in order to capture more water?
My understanding is that they were developed according to the standards at the time, and the best practices changed over time.
Okay.
Could I add to that or?
Go ahead,
Sure.
Mr. Vasquez. We do, since you're on a panel, you may add to that if you have something that's responsive to Mr. Lowe's question.
Yeah, I think in my testimony, I do indicate for the boreholes and the tunnels when they were first constructed. And also in the hydrodynamics group reports, it states, those reports state when boreholes and tunnels were first constructed.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Okay. This is kind of a question for all of you, so I guess I can start out with Mr. Vasquez. With the new field notes from Mr. Rowe that were done in the 1929s and 30s, have you viewed these?
Objection, foundation.
Excuse me?
Your Honor, we have a plan to enter those into evidence. They are story of stuff exhibits. So a foundation will be laid, and in fact has been laid in written testimony that has been submitted.
Okay, we do have a little bit of a problem with sequencing here. Is the person who made the field notes Mr. Rowe? Ms. Doty, maybe you can just tell me that.
The field notes he's referring to and the reports are by an engineer named Mr. Rowe, who was working for a predecessor in interest to BTB back in 1929 to 1935, I think, or into the 40s, actually.
All right, that's Mr. Was your question to Mr. Vasquez, Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
All right, so Mr. Wait, all right, stop. We're doing well here. Everybody's talking one at a time. Let's keep it up. So, Mr. Vasquez, are you familiar with the field notes of Mr. Rowe? I think it was Rowe from 1929 on that Mr. Lowe is talking about here.
I'm aware that they exist. I am not familiar with them.
Okay, so Mr. Lowe, I don't think it's really appropriate to ask Mr. Vasquez about these field notes if he doesn't really know anything about the details of them. So I request that you move on.
Oh, Mr. Eggers has his electronic hand up, however.
Okay, so Mr. Eggers, are you familiar with these field notes?
I'm sorry, this is not to answer the question. Please excuse me, I'm going to request a bio break if we could.
Okay.
5 minutes.
All right, let's take it's a little early for a full afternoon break, but let's take a break until 1:55 and then we'll keep going at that point. And you can go on mute and turn off your video, but please do not log off. We'll come back at 1:55 p.m. Okay, I'm going to ask my staff to take down the screen for the break, and we can get started here. Okay, so it looks like we're all back. So Miss Grady, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just to address the question that Mr. Lowe was just asking, my objection is it was on foundation initially, but also it sounds like we're going outside of the scope of the direct testimony.
All right, so let me remind you that under Government Code 11513 subdivision B, cross-examination is not limited to the scope of the direct. So that objection is overruled. We still are considering the foundational issue, and it sounds like it sounds like Mr. Vasquez did not have sufficient knowledge to answer the question. And I don't know, Mr. Lowe, do you want to follow up with Ms. Stork or Mr. Eggers, or do you want to move on? You have to go off mute so we can hear you.
No, that's fine. I'm done, basically. Thank you very much.
Okay, are you done with all your questions then?
Yes, thank you.
All right. So with that, we will proceed with Ms. Doty. You may start your questioning.
Okay, thank you. So my first question, I'd ask to put up the prosecution team exhibit number 10, please. And then
okay, PT 10 is Mr. Eggers' written testimony.
That's right. And paragraph 35 to start with.
Okay, it helps if you give us the page number, although we'll get there. It's
I
just,
apologize. I had written it down for later ones, but not for.
There we go. We're getting there.
All right, and then sorry, it's hard for me to see the whole thing. So one moment, I'm going to pull it up on my screen here.
Okay, we have paragraph 35, which from exhibit PT 10.
Okay. One moment, I just need to get oriented because I'm starting.
Go ahead, take your time.
Okay, this question is for Mr. Eggers. And this paragraph discusses what has been called the 1909 contract. And it discusses the source of water that was the subject of that 1909 contract. And can you please tell me what the source of that water was that was in controversy?
The source of the water is Cold Creek.
Okay. And then I'm going to please prosecution team slide or exhibit 12, slide 5.
We'll get that.
Okay, and the outline on this slide, is that an outline showing a watershed boundary? This is for Mr. Eggers.
Yes, I believe the original figure had that as the watershed.
Does this figure?
This figure was created by Natalie Stork originally, so she may be the better person to answer this question.
Ms. Stork, does the outline on this slide show the boundary of a watershed?
Yes, it was generated using a USGS tool and various data sets, including the National Hydrography data set.
And what is the name of that watershed?
It doesn't have a specific name. It was generated using a tool where you pick a point and it uses elevation data and hydrography data to generate the watershed.
Strawberry Creek located within the boundary of the outlined watershed?
No.
Is Indian Springs located within the boundary of the outlined watershed?
Yes.
Okay, and then if we could also pull up PT slide 9, please. Or PT exhibit 9, slide 2.
Okay, so this is Mr. Vasquez's his slides that he used to summarize his testimony, PT9, and we'll go to slide 2.
May I ask which person prepared this slide?
I prepared the slide, but the figure originally was prepared by Ms. Stork.
Okay, then I will direct my question to Ms. Stork again. There's a pink outline on this slide. Is that also denoting a watershed?
Yes.
And was it created using the same methodology that you described for the slide we just discussed?
Yes.
And this outline is of
Wait. You're really getting compound here. Let her answer your questions.
Excuse me 1 second. I would want to correct this. I mistook this for one of my slides. This slide was prepared by Victor. So just to correct the testimony.
But it is a slide that was, the figure at least on this slide was, I'm sorry, prepared by Ms. Stork. And it is one of, as I stated in my oral presentation, it's from, well, I'm sorry, no, and it was prepared by Ms. Stork.
Okay, so we got a little confused here, and I may have interrupted, which I apologize. So, Ms. Doty,
My fault.
just ask Ms. Stork your questions about the slide then.
Ms. Stork, there's a pink outline here. Is that correct?
Yes.
And does that pink outline denote the boundary of a watershed?
Yes, from the point, the lowest point along that stream segment.
And what is the name of that watershed?
It doesn't have a formal name, but this is a watershed that includes Strawberry Creek.
And you have denoted on this slide Strawberry Creek watershed next to in the legend?
Yes.
Okay, so, and you may ask to switch back to the prior slide if you need to answer my next question. So there was a watershed in the first slide, and there was a watershed in this second slide, but there is some water in the middle, I believe, that is not included in either of those two watersheds. Is that correct?
We flip back to the last one briefly.
Okay, so that was PT9, slide 2, and we'll flip back to PT12, slide 5. This was Strawberry Creek, and I think the other one had Indian Springs as sort of a point of reference in the watershed. Okay, there's the other one.
Yep.
So
Okay, we can go forward. I would say that is correct. There is an area between the two delineated watersheds.
And on this map, that area is which of the large white arrows is closest to that area?
Coldwater Creek.
Thank you.
May I provide a point of clarification?
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. Just because I know there was some confusion yesterday with that little label that says East Twin Creek. That was auto-generated by ArcGIS from the National Hydrography data set, and they don't have the names of every single creek in the NHD, the National Hydrography data set. And so sometimes it'll auto-populate with the name of the creek that's further downstream. So that's why there are two labels on there. But Coldwater Creek is the local name for this creek.
Thank you for the clarification. That is helpful. Ms. Doty, you may proceed.
Ms. Stork, did you work with the Forest Service in conducting this investigation?
I communicated with staff from the Forest Service.
Could you please put up Story of Stuff Exhibit 84?
Let's put up Story Stuff 84. This is a new exhibit, so it'll take a moment to get it. We'll get it. Okay, and it looks like this is a one-page exhibit, so we'll, if you want to zoom in on certain parts of it or zoom out, let us know. I guess we'll zoom out to start with so we can see the whole thing.
The bottom is more important than the top if we have to scroll.
Okay, Ms. Mullin, just one more, scroll one more notch, please. Okay, is that good, Ms. Doty, for your questioning?
To start, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Are you well, actually, can you scroll all the way down so that they can see the legend?
Okay. And then why don't you, yeah, that's good. So then Ms. Mullin, why don't you just zoom out one notch so we get a little more of the big picture here, so to speak.
Ms. Stork, have you
Excellent.
seen?
Thank you. What, back wrong way. There we go. Perfect. Right there. Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Doty.
Ms. Stork, have you seen this exhibit before?
I don't recall it. Can I ask the date it was produced?
This is part of the special use permit scoping process.
Objection.
I believe it is from 2018.
Objection.
Okay. I have not seen this before. Oh, sorry.
2016 is the date on the map.
Okay, well, so I think there was an objection, but if she has not seen this before, I'm not sure that there are any questions about this. Are you going to try to ask her questions about this exhibit anyway, Ms. Doty?
I am.
Okay, well, there's going to be a problem with a foundation if she has not seen this exhibit before. I don't know exactly how you can establish a foundation for that.
May I try?
Well, go ahead and try.
Okay.
But you have to ask her questions. You can't testify.
I understand. Ms. Stork, have you examined U.S. Geological Survey maps of the area that is portrayed in this exhibit?
Yes.
And does this appear to be an accurate representation at a very high level of the area in question?
Yes.
And is this the area that is at issue in this proceeding?
Yes.
And are you familiar with the locations of the water diversion structures that are at issue in this hearing?
Yes.
And do the red dots on this map accurately represent your understanding of the locations of those diversion points?
Those heli spots, and those would appear to correspond with the helicopter pads in which we landed during the field investigation. The diversion points were nearby.
And the yellow line, does that approximately, or does that line up accurately with your understanding of where the diversion pipeline at issue in this case is located?
Based on my field investigation and on reviewing Google Maps where you can see them, especially around the time of the fire, I would say yes.
Okay. And looking back at the legend, it's marked watershed. Do you see that?
Unnamed watershed?
No, the legend at the bottom of the exhibit. There's the word watershed, and beneath that, there are four
yes.
colored blocks.
Yep.
Okay. And then if you could take a moment, please, and review the locations labeled Coldwater Canyon in purple, Strawberry Creek in blue, West Fork Strawberry Creek in green,
I'm sorry, West Fork, Strawberry Creek in orange. And are these consistent with your own examination and maps showing watershed boundaries? Strike that. Are the watershed boundaries portrayed on this map the same as your understanding of where watershed boundaries are in reality?
They're close.
Do you see any obvious discrepancy you would like to point out?
It looks
Okay.
like,
Or Mr.
Oh,
Lilly,
Miss Grady, do you have an objection?
I do, yes.
What is your objection?
It seems that Miss Doty is asking Miss Stork to give vague assumptions about similarities between maps. It
Okay.
seems to lack foundation.
All right, I'm going to overrule that objection. I think Ms. Doty very carefully is asking questions that Ms. Stork can answer based on her own personal knowledge. And I think she is allowed to do that. So you may proceed, Ms. Doty.
Do you see any obvious discrepancies between your understanding of where the watershed boundaries are and what is portrayed on this exhibit?
it's not a major discrepancy. It looks like unnamed watershed is the point from which the rest of the watershed boundary was derived. And with the Coldwater Canyon and Strawberry Creek watersheds, usually when you delineate a watershed, they come down to a nice point right on the stream, and they're just not coming down to a clear point. So I think it's a minor discrepancy. And I think the watershed boundary might be a tiny bit different in reality, but just around where they come down to the stream, the point that the watershed's delineated from.
Do you think it is accurately portrayed here that the yellow area that we discussed before is wholly within the boundaries of what is labeled here as West Fork, Strawberry Creek, and Strawberry Creek? Is that an accurate portrayal of what you understand the reality to be? Is this an accurate representation?
I don't have knowledge of the general permit area on a map right now other than this map.
Would you agree with what is portrayed on this map, which that the diversion pipeline is located wholly within Strawberry Creek?
I was under the impression that the pipeline made it all the way down to the old hotel site. And so that would cross over the watershed, the Coldwater Canyon watershed at some point. But I'm not 100% sure on that, and it might be better to ask Mr. Eggers or Mr. Vasquez to clarify.
This was my fault. The question I was asking didn't get at my real concern, which is that the points of diversion, which you had previously testified to, are they located as portrayed in this exhibit wholly within the two Strawberry Creek watersheds? Is that accurate?
The points of diversion are not displayed on this map. The helipads are, but based on my knowledge of where the points of diversion are located, yes, they're all located. Actually, 10, 11, 12, I would need to see exactly mapped out because oh, wait, no, there they are. Sorry, there's an extra helipad on there. I apologize, and I'm making the court reporter write too much. I'm sorry. Based on my knowledge of the locations of the points of diversion and based on looking carefully at this map, I would say that all the points of diversion are located within the orange area delineating the West Fork Strawberry Creek watershed.
Thank you. So returning to prosecution team slide 9, please, or exhibit 9, slide 2, please.
Okay, PT 9, slide 2, we will put up.
Okay. So is Coldwater Canyon in the Strawberry Creek watershed?
No,
Where is it in relation to the Strawberry Creek watershed?
it's immediately west.
One moment. So if you could please put up prosecution team exhibit 7. And go to page 8. This is Mr. Vasquez's testimony. And I will ask this question of Ms. Stork since she was just testifying. Ms. Stork, could you review what Mr. Vasquez has testified to in paragraph 21, which starts on the preceding page or at the bottom of the page?
I believe I reviewed Mr. Vasquez's testimony.
Sorry, could you, you'll need to see the next page to see the entirety of.
So Ms. Stork, tell us when you've read those first 2 lines and then we'll scroll to the next page.
1, 2, 3, 7, 8. Okay, ready for the next page.
And you don't need to read the whole thing. If you could just read through line 2.
Through line 2, okay.
Okay, so there is a sentence there that says these natural springs, referring to the diversion, the springs at issue in this case, are adjacent to or are in the immediate vicinity of tributary ravines of Strawberry Creek at the head of Coldwater Canyon. You have just testified a moment ago that Coldwater Creek is not within, our Strawberry Creek is not within Coldwater Canyon, I believe. So is this statement incorrect?
We come to a confluence. And so I'm also not recalling exactly what the historical name usage was. And so by saying it's at the head of Coldwater Canyon, I would think the headwaters. They come to a confluence, and I'm not sure if the downstream reach is called, I mean, on the NHD, it's called East Twin Creek, but it may have been called Coldwater Creek in the past. So I don't have enough information to say it's correct or incorrect. I would defer to Victor. Sorry, Mr. Vasquez. Apologize for that.
Let me ask the question in a different way, perhaps. Is it accurate to say that what this sentence is saying?
Leading.
Go ahead, Mr. Go ahead and ask the question and then we'll see if I'll decide after I hear the question.
Also, Mr. Lilly, so that it's clear, we are not entirely unified with the prosecution team in terms of of their analysis. So I'm not sure that I would be precluded from asking leading questions. We disagree with them on this.
All right, well, go ahead and ask your question and then we'll see if Ms. Grady still objects, and if so, I'll make a ruling.
Okay. In reading this sentence, is it accurate to say that what it says is that the springs at issue are in tributary ravines at the top of Coldwater Canyon?
I am thinking.
Take your time.
I don't refer to this area as Coldwater Canyon. I refer to it as the Strawberry Creek watershed.
Mr. Vasquez, do you refer to the headwaters of Strawberry Creek as Coldwater Canyon?
My interpretation of what I wrote in my written testimony is probably due to my understanding that the entire area was Coldwater Canyon, of which Strawberry Creek was one of the streams in there. Which is why when Mr. Lilly asked me, that was the first question I fielded in my testimony yesterday. I got it wrong because my understanding is the entire area was Coldwater Canyon.
What do you base that understanding on?
I would like to. I think it's based on some so the hydrology reports from the 90s, which refer to these springs as being in Coldwater Canyon.
And those hydrology reports were prepared by whom?
By, I believe, the early ones were Hydrodynamics Group for Nestle, or the predecessor of BlueTriton, and then another report by Danes and Moore, also for predecessor of BlueTriton.
Okay, Ms. Stork, are you aware of any source other than a report prepared at the behest of BTB or its predecessor that refers to the headwaters of Strawberry Creek as Coldwater Canyon?
The reason why I paused and thought deeply is because I was thinking back to the multitude of historical documents that I reviewed when I was a part of the investigation, and many of them were sort of muddy, or I should say unclear or generalized names from one area to the other in this general area above the historic hotel. And so there may be other documents.
Can you point? Well, let's turn then to.
I should add, it's been more than 4.5 years since I've reviewed those documents, so I would not be able to point to a specific one.
So, Ms. Doty, are you just checking to see whether you have any follow-up questions?
I do have follow-up questions. I am reorganizing them quickly.
Okay. Are you ready to proceed, or should we take a short break?
We could take a short break if you would like to take a short break. I think I'll be ready to proceed shortly.
how much more time do you think you have with your questions?
10 or 15 minutes.
Okay, it sounds like if you're reorganizing, that's probably a good thing, because that may help make them more efficient and be clearer and go faster. And I certainly understand why you may need to do that after hearing what you've heard. So let's just go, we'll take a short break down to 4 minutes. Let's come back at 2:30 to give you a chance to do that, and then we'll be back. So again, you can turn off, but don't log off. 2:30. All right, we're back. Ms. Doty, you may proceed.
Okay, thank you. Could we put up slide prosecution team 10, paragraph 38, which is on page 13?
Okay, we'll get PT 10 up. And what page?
That's it. But scroll down so we can see paragraph 38, please.
All right.
Okay, this question is for Mr. Eggers. And this paragraph is discussing what people have been calling the 1910 case. And you in this paragraph, is it accurate to say, strike that. Please review this paragraph, Mr. Eggers. Okay. Could you succinctly in a sentence or two, Mr. Eggers, tell me what your understanding is of what the 1910 dispute was?
It was a dispute over the hotel AHSC canceling the contract, the 1909 contract, before its terms would have ended. And they sent a letter, I believe in December of 1909, stating that they wouldn't deliver any additional water. And so ASWC, the bottler, sued them for breach of contract.
Okay, so they were fighting over a certain amount of water that is in the same location roughly as the water we're talking about in this case. Is that the point of this paragraph?
No, that wasn't the same water. This was water from Cold Creek. The water that we're talking about is the spring water is diverted up in Strawberry Canyon.
Great, so could you please put up slide number 12 again?
And what exhibit number is that, please?
I'm sorry, it is exhibit 12, slide 5.
Okay.
Just to clean our record, it's PT 12.
Pete, yes. PT 12, page 5 is now on the screen. Go ahead and ask your question now, please.
So Mr. Eggers, your testimony at paragraph 38 is talking about water derived from what location on this map?
It would have been from Coldwater Creek,
And Coldwater Creek is denoted how on this map?
with a white arrow that says Coldwater Creek.
Thank you. And if we could put up PT 234, please.
Okay, hopefully we have that. That was previously displayed. All right, what page would you like us to go to in this exhibit?
Oh, my apologies. Can you put PT 235 up?
Okay, we'll move to PT 235. And what page on this one?
Page 20.
All right. And do you want us to scroll down? If so, tell us where to.
Yes, let's see, starting on line 6.
Okay.
Mr. Lilly, I'm going to have an objection about foundation on this one.
Well, let's see what her question is, and then I will determine whether or not well, I'll rule on your objection, but go ahead and ask your question, Ms. Doty, and then Mr. Eggers, pause for a minute so Ms. Grady can have a chance to state an objection if she wants to. Go ahead, Ms. Doty, ask your question.
Mr. Eggers, are you familiar with this document?
Yes, I reviewed this document.
And what is this document?
I believe this is testimony from the 1910 case. Excuse me.
Okay, and in reviewing this document, did you reach a conclusion about what water was at issue in this case?
In this case, it was for the delivery of water from Coldwater Canyon
Okay,
to the
and
bottler.
because there was some confusion about that earlier, could we please go back to PT 12 exhibit slide 5 for a moment?
Okay.
And can you identify on this figure what water that is?
It's from the water course that enters the property that is labeled Coldwater Creek.
And then please going back to PT 235, same location. And since you testified that you are familiar with this document, there's discussion on line 10 of a reservoir.
So what is your question?
I'm just giving him a chance to look at that.
Okay.
Do you see that reference, Mr. Eggers?
I see it.
And going back again to PT 12, do you have a sense of where this reservoir is located?
I don't know exactly where that reservoir is located.
Does any other panelists have a understanding of where the reservoir is located?
I do not.
Ms. Stork, do you have any idea where that reservoir was located or would have been located?
Not at this time.
Okay. Ms. Doty, you may proceed.
There is, mention of several reservoirs.
Yeah, there's no question right now. So let's let Ms. Doty ask a question and then you can answer.
Mr. Eggers, you concluded that the 7.26 acre feet to which Nestle may be entitled was as a result, what was the basis for your conclusion that 7.26 acre feet per year of water may be, BTB may be entitled to that amount?
The basis of that was the eventual perfection of an incipient right that was initiated by the 1909 contract to deliver water from Coldwater Creek by the hotel to the bottler.
Which was that the same business arrangement that resulted in the 1910 case we were just discussing?
Yes.
And so the subject matter of that case you previously testified was water derived from Coldwater Creek. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's all I have on that line of questioning. So I will turn to another topic.
All right, please proceed.
This question is for Ms. Stork. do you recall in yesterday's testimony making a comment along the lines of, which was made in sort of a tongue-in-cheek way, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, why were these springs first developed in the discussion about groundwater?
Ms.
Not
Stork,
quite
if-
sure that was it.
Do you recall making some comment yesterday? The inflection doesn't do well in the transcript, but why do you believe that the locations were originally selected for diversion in Strawberry Canyon?
I believe they were originally selected because they were springs, and I'll leave it at they were springs. I'll let you do the questions.
And when you say they were springs, do you mean that what would have inspired somebody to develop a particular location? What do you mean by saying they were springs?
Well, if someone wanted to collect spring water, they would go on a hike up the canyon and find some springs.
Do you have any evidence that an analysis was done of groundwater before originally locating diversion points?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Do you have any evidence that there was any analysis done at any of the locations of the potential for groundwater development before locating the original diversions?
I don't have evidence, but I don't know if you'd find that much evidence at the time. I mean, back then they didn't understand basics like cones of depression and well interactions. So I think that was around 1940. Could be wrong. Might have been a little earlier, but groundwater in court cases back then was sometimes described as mysterious or occult. So I'm not sure how much investigation you would find. Were there any? By back then, I mean late 1920s.
Would you expect if a borehole was drilled in 1930 for there to be physical evidence remaining on the surface of where the exact spring location was back in 1930?
Can you clarify drilled?
Objection, hypothetical.
I think I'm going to overrule the objection. If Ms. Stork, if you have knowledge, you may testify, and if you don't, just say you don't have knowledge to answer that, sufficient to answer that question.
I'm not aware of horizontal borings drilled with a drill rig from the 1930s.
So if any of these sites were developed in 1930, would you expect to be able to walk out today and point to, and in continuous use since then, would you expect to be able to walk out today and point to surface features that would tell you where the original spring location was?
Same objection.
This is really calling for speculation, but I'm going to allow it on the basis that Ms. Stork does have significant expertise in this area and may know what is a typical situation or what you'd find in the ground. We'll just say 90 years later. So I'm going to overrule the objection and allow Ms. Stork to answer if she has any knowledge or sufficient knowledge to answer the question.
At the time, they developed springs by digging them out with pickaxes and I would assume dynamite and other things like that, digging the springs out in the case of fractured rock, like these springs. I wouldn't expect to see anything of the original spring orifice. The only thing I might look for would be in this area, we know that faults can act to either transmit water or act as a barrier to flow. And so that could hint at where you might find springs, but it isn't a definitive feature. It would just be where you look. But you might find springs away from faults too. Interconnected fractures are very hard to anticipate where they go.
And Ms. Stork, this question is for you first, but having conducted this investigation, would you say that you're familiar with all diversions, contemporary present day diversions from Strawberry Creek watershed?
I believe I'm familiar with all of the contemporary diversions from Strawberry Creek watershed, especially those above the toe of the meadow, approximately just down gradient from Springs 10, 11, 12, and up to the top of the Strawberry Creek watershed there.
And are you aware of anyone other than BlueTriton Brands who is diverting water in the Strawberry Creek watershed?
The U.S. Forest Service has a permit, but I don't believe they have produced water or carried it away under that permit for a substantial amount of time. And I believe they want to keep it for just environmental uses on site. So I'm not aware of anyone carrying water away from that site.
And Mr. Eggers, I will ask you the same question. Having conducted this investigation, would you say you're familiar with all diversions of water from the Strawberry Creek watershed?
Above the Del Rosa line, yes.
And are you aware of anyone else who is diverting water from the Strawberry Creek watershed?
Other than what Ms. Stork already said?
Other than BlueTriton. And Mr. Vasquez, are you familiar with all diversions of water from the Strawberry Creek watershed?
I am familiar with BlueTriton's diversions in the Strawberry Creek watershed. I am also familiar with the point of diversion that's licensed now under the U.S. Forest Service.
And are you aware of anyone who else other than BTB who is today actively diverting water from the Strawberry Creek watershed?
No.
That is the end of my line of questioning.
Okay, so is that's all your questions for these witnesses?
That is, thank you.
All right. All right, so I have just a couple of questions, famous last lines, but hopefully true here. So Ms. Mullen, if you could please put up exhibit PT9 and go to slide or page 7, I would appreciate it. And I'll start with you, Mr. Vasquez. This was one of your slides. And so, Mr. Vasquez, I believe you previously testified, but I just want to make sure it's right. Is this figure from a textbook, or is it depicting anything in the area of the BlueTriton Springs? You're on, somehow you got on mute, so you have to go off mute.
No, this is a figure from a journal article, I believe from the 60s. And it is not anything specifically about the Strawberry Creek watershed.
All right, and I guess in particular, and if you can't answer, I'll ask Ms. Stork, but the depiction of aquifer here, at least in my simple mind, looks like what I'd call unconsolidated alluvial materials rather than fractured bedrock materials. Do you agree that that's what this depiction appears to be?
I can see why you would think that. The diagram did not try to identify the formations other than this impervious barrier.
All right. So but the actual formations that we are dealing with in this hearing are in fact fractures in bedrock. Is that what the water bearing formations are here?
That is my understanding from Ms. Stork's analysis and from the hydrology reports. Yes.
All right, and Ms. Stork, do you want to elaborate on that? Or I mean, again, this is a very general question, but are the water bearing formations that support the BlueTriton sources at issue in this hearing all fractures in bedrock formations?
Yes.
All right, and I'm not sure. I know that was the case for the upper divergence. Is that also the case for the boreholes 10, 11, and 12?
Very likely. Boreholes 10, 11, and 12 are very close to where a steep bedrock slope comes into a meadow. And it's hard to know exactly because of the fact that we didn't locate springs 10, 11, and 12, the actual springs themselves. But I would assume the water at those springs is either coming from the fractured bedrock, and if it could hit the meadow and seep out right there. But yeah, hard to say without finding exact sites of 10, 11, and 12, so I'll stop speculating.
All right, thank you. And then just one more simple question, and you can probably answer it, Ms. Stork. This figure shows what it has a pipe, and then on the left side, it's a depiction of horizontal well. And it bothers me because this seems to go uphill from the aquifer to the opening at the surface of the ground. The tunnels and boreholes that are involved with BlueTriton sources that we're discussing in this hearing, in those cases, do all of the tunnels in fact have a gradient that is downward so that the water would flow from the aquifer to the end of the pipe at the surface of the earth?
I just want to say it bothers me too whenever I look at this. Why is it going down? I actually don't have, to my knowledge, whether they were drilled at precisely, straight and level into the hillside, but to use gravity for flow without filling the whole tunnel, you would want to have it level.
Okay, so the actual tunnels and boreholes that support the BlueTriton sources are either almost exactly horizontal or may have a slight gradient so that the water would flow out of them. Is that correct?
Yeah, my understanding is that the practice for drilling a horizontal borehole is that they're actually horizontal. And I have looked inside of Tunnel 2 at the field investigation, and that one appeared to be level.
All right, thank you. So, Ms. Mullen, if you can please shift or display exhibit PT7 and go to page 28 and line 16. All right, that's fine, thank you. So, Mr. Vasquez, this question is for you. The last sentence here, it starts at line 15 and a half and goes to line 17. It actually starts on line 14 and a half. Unless information becomes available showing otherwise, Directive 1 applies to only 48% of the cumulative flow from boreholes 7, 7A, 7B, and 7C that the division staff has determined to be definitively within the board's permitting authority. Do you see that sentence?
I do.
And my question is, how, assuming that the State Water Board issued a cease and desist order that prohibited BlueTriton from diverting 48% of the cumulative flow from these boreholes, how could that order specify details so BlueTriton could implement that? And otherwise, to make sure that 48% of the cumulative flow would be bypassed?
So I believe we contemplated this. We said that the 48% determination was at least 48%, and that it was based on an annual amounts because we lacked detailed information. So I would be open to considering a physical solution or an agreement where we agree to 48%, but I'm one person. I definitely would need to discuss, agreeing to physical solutions with our management. But if you're asking me how BlueTriton could, if we're open to physical solutions, that would be one way.
And what do you mean when you use the term physical solution here?
If we agree like on each day, or we will allow, BlueTriton proposes to divert 48% of the flow in one day and then shut off the valves the rest of the time. I'm sorry, if BlueTriton agrees to take 52% in one day and then shut off the valves at spring 7 to allow the remainder to go out, that would require some kind of like predictive, so that ahead of time, or you have an idea ahead of time how much might be flowing today, and agree to that, or maybe in a week's time, or maybe even a year's time. But again, the details would have to be ironed out so that beneficial uses or impacts on the riparian habitat are considered, and that you don't allow dewatering of the stream extensively while still achieving 48%.
All right. Let's go on now to the next page of this, or no, excuse me, same page. If you can scroll down, Ms. Mullen, to line 20. I'm sorry, I can't read my own. Page 28. No, I want to go to the next page, page 29, excuse me. If you can go to page 29 and then go to line 20. All right, so this in reference to Directive 6 in the draft cease and desist order, Mr. Vasquez, your testimony states, starting at line 20, the deputy director may, based on a review of that report, this is a report that would be required from BlueTriton, refine the conclusions of the revised ROI regarding how much water diverted at each POD is subject to the permitting authority of the State Water Board. Do you see that?
I do.
So my question is, now that we have the revised ROI and we have a draft CDO, and now we have this hearing, and presumably at some point after the hearing is done, my office will prepare a proposed order and the board may adopt that. And if the board does adopt an order, how would this process or how could this process work for the deputy director to review a subsequent report from BlueTriton to refine the conclusions in the ROI after the water board had issued an order?
If you're asking if, I don't think the deputy director would have to issue a revised ROI. They would just, he or she would just come up with a new amount that's going to be enforced. And I would guess that it would require an amended cease and desist order, or unless a mechanism is built in to the order that will be presented before the board now to amend it without having to adopt a new order. But
All right, thank you. And that's probably as much a legal question as anything. So I'll just note, Mr. Petrozelli, it's something you may want to consider in your closing briefing when we get to that point. And I'm going to move on. Mr. Vasquez, are you familiar with the groundwater recordation notices that are in exhibits PT 93 through 100?
yes,
Okay. And if Ms. Mullen, if you can please put up exhibit PT1, which I believe is the draft CDO. And go to page 2, paragraph 2. All right, and just make it one notch bigger if you can, please. Thank you. So, Mr. Vasquez, in this paragraph 2, there are references to 12 groundwater recordation numbers. And I noticed that the exhibits PT 93 through 100 contain the notices for 8 of those, but not the other 4. Do you know why the prosecution team did not submit the copies of the notices for the other 4?
I would like to ask Natalie Stork if she would like to answer, since she did the research on trying to locate these.
All right. So, Ms. Stork, did you hear the question, or do you want me to repeat it?
With the question, right now I'm looking at table 2 attachments to my 2017 report, but it'll be the same as the 2021 report, or was it 2020? 2021. And I'm not sure exactly which ones were submitted as evidence for the prosecution team, but I do know, for instance, well 10, the microfiche file said that the file was lost when it was recorded on microfiche. For well 7C, it says in my notes that there's no first notice in the file. So in the microfiche file, I don't think there was a first notice at all. For well 7, my note says the microfiche is missing, which I believe that means there wasn't a microfiche at all, versus for well 10, I remember the microfiche, you'd put it in and it says like, this file was not found. And then for Spring Tunnel 7, the last extractions were in 1950, which was before the Water Recordation Act of 1955. So that would explain those 4.
All right. And as you all know, we are trying to assemble a complete set of all of these. So if I need to revisit this, I'll let the parties know. I do have one other question, probably for you, Ms. Stork. And Ms. Mullen, if you can put up exhibit PT 96. And I'll just tell you while she's putting that up, Ms. Stork, this is the notices for G360-18111. And it was not one of the numbers listed in that paragraph 2 on page 2 of the draft CDO. So I'm just trying to figure out, what is this notice for, if you know?
Oh, 36-01811. I believe this is the surface water diversion. Can we see the whole thing or document? Yeah.
Okay.
East Twin Creek, tributary to Santa Ana River. So, and it's the Del Rosa Mutual Water Company. So the Water Recordation Act of 1955 was interesting in that if you filed a groundwater recordation, this is before there was a statements program. You could actually do the equivalent of a statement for your surface water rights using the groundwater recordation form if you had groundwater recordations. And even once statements law came into effect, I think you could continue to use the groundwater recreations to report surface water diversions as long as they're being diverted according to the pre-14 or riparian right, if I'm not mistaken. So
in the
this is
four
a surface
counties.
water diversion. Yes, yeah, in the 4 counties where the Water Recordation Act took effect.
Okay. That's very interesting. I've been doing this
And
water rights business. I did not know that one.
Yeah, and Mr. Lilly, just for clarity, I think Mr. Eggers, he was trying to be helpful. He spoke over Ms. Stork a little bit. So for clarity of the record, maybe we can allow them to repeat their statements.
Okay, well, I think I heard what I needed to hear. Ms. Eggers, you were bad. You spoke while Ms. Stork was still speaking, which I've asked people not to do, but you'll learn. But I heard you just to say that Ms. Stork's response was qualified that the recordation law only applies in 4 specified counties in Southern California. And I certainly am aware of that. I didn't know it was 4, but I know it's a limited number of counties in Southern California. So with that, I think we can move on and actually, let me double check. That's all the questions I have. So let's just talk about planning.
I apologize, I have my hand up.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Ms. Stark. Excuse me.
Yeah, I wanted to ask if I could make a point of clarification on a question that you asked me earlier.
Okay, please go ahead. Maybe you can tell me what the question, well, just go ahead and tell me what the clarification is.
Yeah, you asked Victor and I about a figure in his testimony. It was labeled as figure 3 and Victor specified that it's from a report. And you had questions about whether it was displaying alluvial material or fractured bedrock. Is it possible we could go back to that figure?
Yes, we can. And I appreciate the clarification. This is PT 9, page 7.
I just want to make sure the figure is fully explained now so you don't get any surprises later.
Please go ahead and explain now. And I'm sorry if I didn't ask you about this, but
No,
I know I asked Mr. Vasquez, but go ahead.
So the first thing I want to say is that this figure, the geology of the site that we're talking about is different, but the concepts are all the same. So I really appreciate this figure. I know it was bothering both of us because the horizontal well isn't horizontal. But just so you know, it's labeled as a dike spring formation. That's because the impervious barrier in this figure isn't a fault. It's actually an intrusive volcanic feature called a dike, where lava intrudes through other cooled rock and creates sort of a surface and can form a barrier. So while this does display an alluvial aquifer butting up against a volcanic dike with a horizontal well drilled into it to collect water from the water table aquifer, I just wanted to point out that while the geology is different, all the concepts are the same. So I just wanted to clarify that. So
is it fair to say the hydraulic concepts are the same, even though the geology is different?
Yeah, it can be a little bit different with fractured rock because you don't know the interconnectedness of the fractures, but honestly, that can be the same in an alluvial aquifer where you don't know where clay lenses are in clayey areas. So while it's a little different with fractured rock, all the concepts are the same with regards to, water table, barrier, horizontal well.
All right. Well, thank you for that clarification. That is helpful. So go ahead, Ms. Mullen, you can go ahead and take down that exhibit. And I'm going to ask for planning purposes for what we should do today, the rest of today, and then tomorrow. So first of all, Mr. Petrozelli, in our line of questioners, you are next up with an opportunity to do redirect. Do you anticipate that you will want to do redirect?
No.
No redirect?
No redirect, Mr. Lowe.
Okay. All right. And then for one of or any of the BlueTriton attorneys, but it looks like Ms. Grady's hand is up. So let me ask the question and then you can answer. And if you need to comment, do that as well. Does BlueTriton intend to do recross? Because clearly there were materials that were covered by the questionings after you did your last line of questioning. So is there going to be recross by BlueTriton?
At this time, we'd like to reserve a little time for it.
Well, it would be now.
Oh, I
This-
apologize.
Your next step.
Can I have a moment to speak with my colleagues? My question was a separate issue.
Okay, why don't you ask your question and we'll be pondering that while you confer with your colleagues.
Perfect. I wanted to follow up because we realized we had failed to request that if Ms. Stork or Mr. Vasquez had any notes that they were relying on during their testimony, that they be asked to preserve those, please.
Okay, yeah, and let's just make sure that's clear for Ms. Stork, Mr. Vasquez, and Mr. Eggers. If there are any notes, and we do have to go on the honor system here since we're not in one room, but I'm sure you will all follow my directions. If there are any notes that you referred to while you were testifying, either yesterday or today, please save those. And it's probably best if you put them in a separate folder or envelope or something that says notes I referred to while testifying on January 10 and 11, 2022. And then if BlueTriton wants, they do have a right to ask for those to be submitted, and we can put them into evidence as exhibits, but that is their right. And Ms. Grady, I don't hear you asking that now. You just want those preserved. Is that correct?
That is correct. Thank you, Mr. Lilly.
Okay, so again, now I have two more hands. This is what happens. Ms. Stork, go ahead. What's your question?
If all of my notes were only documents submitted by the prosecution team as evidence, and maybe I have some scribbles on them, but pretty minimally, are those notes you would like to have preserved?
You don't need to preserve copies of PT exhibits, but if they have scribbles on, you do need to preserve those.
Okay, thank you.
Because those are technically, they're like notes that may have prompted some of your answers. So please do that. But if it's exactly something already in the record, you don't need to preserve it. Mr. Vasquez, your question.
Yes, so I would like clarification. The notes that are to be preserved are the ones I referred to while answering during cross or when I gave my oral presentation.
Yes, anything you looked at while you were testifying.
I see. Follow-up question. I looked at a notepad for some notes. That notepad or that page of the notepad has other notes on it, but I did not use those notes in my response. Can
we're
be redacted, or I mean, it's innocuous, but
yeah, we've got to have you on the honor system. If it's something you looked at while you were testifying, preserve it. If it's something you did not look at, you could redact that. Is that clear?
Yes.
All right. So, Ms. Grady, do you want time? I was hoping we could wrap up by 3:30. Do you want a couple of minutes to confer with your colleagues on potential recross, or do you know now whether or not anybody from BlueTriton is going to want to do recross?
If you could just give me one quick moment to see if I can send a note to everybody to confirm, please.
Please go ahead. We will wait. We will just stay online here so nobody do anything embarrassing. I'm going to drink water myself.
Mr. Lilly, I want to ask you what I think is a I thought we were, and this may be my error, but I thought we were concluding today at 3. Are we in fact concluding later today? I may have gotten that totally wrong.
3:30 was what I said.
Okay, that's fine.
And I'm thinking we might make it.
Okay.
All right, Miss Grady. Oh, I thought you were ready to speak.
One second, I apologize. We will not do any redirect at this point. Thank you. Or recross, I'm sorry.
All right. So that means all of the questioning of these witnesses has been concluded. And thank you all very much for your patience and for putting up with me. If I cut some of you off, I apologize. I was just trying to keep the hearing going efficiently and according to the rules. So the next thing on my agenda, Mr. Petrozelli, would you like to offer any of the prosecution team's exhibits into evidence at this time? You have to go off mute though, so we can hear you. There you go.
Yes, we would, Mr. Lilly, and that will include Ms. Stork's statement of qualifications when she has them complete.
Okay, so do you want to offer all of your other exhibits into evidence at this time?
Yes.
So that's PT1 through PT310. And then with the understanding that tomorrow, I don't think there's going to be any objection to PT311, that being the historic statement of qualifications, but we'll address that tomorrow. So with that, I'll turn to you, Ms. Grady, to start with, but any of the other BlueTriton attorneys may speak up if they want to. Does BlueTriton have objections to any of these exhibits being received into evidence?
Mr. Lilly, could we hold on that issue just for a moment or to the beginning of the day tomorrow?
I'll tell you what, I think that is a fair thing to do because there are 310 exhibits. There'll be 311 by tomorrow morning. And I think it's a lot. And I think it is appropriate for you to take the time, particularly now that you've had the testimony, to decide which, if any, of those you want to object to and which ones you do not want to object to. So let's plan to handle that issue first thing tomorrow morning. And as I did give a little recitation yesterday morning about the rules of evidence, so please make sure to check those as to what rules of evidence apply. But as necessary, I'll go through them, hopefully not one by one, but we'll go through them in groups as necessary if there are any objections. So Mr. Petrozelli, you may want to brush up on the rules of evidence as well. I know I had to yesterday. And we will just go through those. Other parties may respond as appropriate, although I think this is mainly going to be BlueTriton's objections and the prosecution team's responses, since these are obviously prosecution team's exhibits. So we will start tomorrow morning at 9 with that. And then when we finish that, we will shift over to the direct testimony by Mr. Lawrence for BlueTriton. And then, of course, cross-examination of Mr. Lawrence by the other parties. And I think, considering the length of his testimony, we should be able to finish that tomorrow. I expect we will finish it tomorrow, probably tomorrow morning. And then, unless anyone has any objections, I still think it would be good for us to all have a break to regroup on the rest of Wednesday and then to start Thursday morning. So I see Mr. Donald, we haven't heard from you much today. Your hand is up there now. What would you like to say something on this topic?
Well, of course, I'm going to throw a wrench in your plans, Mr. Lilly, and ask your indulgence. We have a major trial brief and a groundwater adjudication due on Wednesday before midnight. If at all possible, we did have this hearing scheduled through Friday. If we could take the witnesses and the testimony that was to come in from, I believe it's SOS and Ms. Fry and a few other smaller testimonies on Friday, we would greatly appreciate that.
I am very sorry that you have to work until midnight to prepare a brief in another matter. I just don't want to, that would basically mean we would not do anything at all on Thursday. I am very concerned that if we were to follow that, we would not be able to finish on Friday. So, but I believe me, I am sympathetic to attorney workloads. I have had them myself. So let's think about that. Mr. Donlan, please give that some thought tomorrow or tonight, and we'll talk about it again tomorrow morning and talk about it with your colleagues. I would like to give you some leeway. Of course, by giving you all day Wednesday, I think I am giving you some leeway that you otherwise would not have had. So I hope that will help.
Well, hopefully it will be all day on Wednesday. I think we're talking about testimony in the morning, though.
Yeah, we are going to spend some time in the morning with Mr. Lawrence. That's true. But the rest of Wednesday will be off to do as you deem appropriate. But we potentially could start. Well, we potentially could not go all day on Thursday if that would help accommodate you. But let's see. And one thing you can do that would really help this is try to develop estimates of how long your cross-examination will be of the other party's witnesses. I mean, we have Mr. Bilecki, Mr. Lowe, and Mr. Serrano have very short testimony, so I suspect their cross-ex will go fairly quickly, as should their direct. But Story of the Stuff and Amanda Fry have very extensive exhibits, and there could potentially be a lot of cross-examination, and there could be a lot of argument about which of those exhibits are admissible and which ones are not. So I'll just say I'm very hesitant to assume we could do that all on Friday. I don't think we probably could. So let's talk about this tomorrow morning, and we'll see if we can work out an accommodation that works for you, me, and the other parties. But I really do want to try to wrap this up by the end of the day on Friday, because otherwise we have to schedule an additional hearing day after Friday. So
Understood, Mr. Lilly. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other comments for today? All right, so Mr. Lawrence, we'll see you bright and early at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, as we will see everybody else. But, oh, I'm sorry, you get a little break. We do have to first rule on the, if there are any BlueTriton exhibit objections to the prosecution team's exhibits. And then after we've done that, we will proceed with Mr. Lawrence. So anything else for today? All right, well, thank you all very much. I do want to compliment you all on being very professional and patient. I mean, these are very, very important issues. And I think everyone has done his or her best to try to present their arguments and questions in a professional way. And I really do appreciate that. And with that, I will see you all tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Thank you.
Thanks.